you may believe. The Gospel of the Lord. All throughout our Easter season, we have readings from the Acts of the Apostles, which is the story of the early church written by St. Luke. And it's almost like a family scrapbook in which we open up and look back and see, oh, these were the people that were in the early church, and their lives really come alive throughout the pages. And then we see these are the events that happened in this, the first 30 or 40 years of the church. And it's really remarkable. And one of the things that we see is that the church, even in its youth, shortly after the Pentecost, it had the same characteristics of the Church of Christ as today. And those characteristics are sometimes called the four marks. And when we say the creed at Mass, as we will here in a few minutes, we say, I believe in one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. And we see all four of those things present even in the beginning. The church is one. The church has a unity of doctrine, a unity of sacraments, a unity of leadership. And that's what we see in the first reading today. It says the whole church was in agreement about this one decision that they made. And the church is also holy because the church has the means of sanctification and desires to make people holy. And we hear in the gospel too that Jesus has promised the Holy Spirit to the church to lead the church into truth and to teach and to remind the people of the church what he said. And what we hear in the first reading too is that they make this decision under the guidance of the Holy Spirit. They say, it is the decision of the Holy Spirit and of us. And they go on to say what it is. The church is Catholic, which means universal. So even in our reading today, we hear that they wanted to teach the same thing in Jerusalem, in Antioch, in Syria, in Cilicia. During the first 20 years of the church, it had not gone throughout the whole world yet, but it was still the places where it was. And finally, the church is apostolic because it is built upon the foundation of the apostles. And that's what we heard in the second reading from the book of Revelation. St. John says he saw this heavenly Jerusalem, and there was 12 courses of stone on the walls, each with the name of the apostles. So the church is founded upon those apostles. And so that's how it was in the beginning. And now, all these years later, it's the same. The church is still one. The church has one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of us all. The church is holy because it still has the same sacraments and desire to make people holy. And it's still led by the Holy Spirit. There was no expiration date on the promise of Jesus to give the Holy Spirit to the church. And the Holy Spirit is still leading the church today. The church is still Catholic, meaning it is all around the whole world. And now you can go from Antarctica to the North Pole, from Kingman to Kazakhstan, and the catechism is the same, and the Mass is the same everywhere you go. The church is truly now universal, even more so than it was in those early days. It is also universal throughout time, from the beginning even to now. And the church is still apostolic, because we still have the same faith as the apostles. And we have the successor of St. Peter called the Pope, and the successors of the apostles called our bishops. And so we see in the early church those four distinguishing characteristics of the Church of Christ still present with us today. And that's what the Acts of the Apostles can teach us. One other thing that we hear in the Acts of the Apostles that is important for us is this debate and dissension that happened early on. Now, it would take me too long to try to explain this in great detail, but essentially what happened was that Paul and Barnabas were teaching one thing, and then this other group of people were teaching something different. And so they decided, let's settle this. They go to the apostles, and this is called the Council of Jerusalem. They gather everyone together, and they talk about, what are we going to teach? St. Peter is the one who leads this meeting, and St. James, another of the apostles, also has a big role to play. And they have a decision to make. They can either say, this is what we teach, and these other people are wrong, or they could say, as long as you agree on these fundamental things, it doesn't matter what you teach about these other things. And what did they decide? They decided to say, no, this is what we believe. And anybody that teaches something different is wrong. And this caused a great commotion, obviously, because the people that were told that they were wrong didn't really like that. And they caused a lot of trouble for Paul and Barnabas later on. But that's what happened. The apostles said, no, it is the decision of the Holy Spirit and of us that we want to teach this. And so this is important for us today because there's this idea that sometimes is called indifferentism. Indifferentism, like, it doesn't really matter what you believe about some things as long as you believe the important things. It's like saying it doesn't really matter whether or not the Eucharist is truly the body and blood of Christ. It doesn't really matter whether Jesus instituted the sacrament of confession to forgive serious sins after baptism. It doesn't really matter whether the Pope has universal spiritual jurisdiction in the church or not. All that matters is that you teach the Trinity and the incarnation of Christ and redemption. But is that what the early church taught? No, clearly not. These things do matter, and so we ought to seek them out and believe them truly. And so we have the Holy Spirit to help us. So today, let us ask the Holy Spirit, even in our own lives, to help us to find the truth and to know the truth and to love the truth and to live the truth in our lives and to reject these thoughts about like, well, it doesn't really matter, because no, it does matter. It does matter. The early church, it mattered. It still matters today. And so we ought to really embrace what the church teaches and allow the Holy Spirit to work in our lives to make us accept that and believe it and live it even more.